It's a little difficult to notice anything off about the environment when the entire thing is collapsing. The wildfires were easily explained away as the unfortunate result of a few brief thunderstorms, and nobody except the gauchos ever went into the charred out remains of the forests. Since the gauchos were technically trespassing on government land, it only took a few missing men and mutilated corpses to permanently scatter them from the whole region. When they left, nature returned, at least on paper, if anyone from the forest dry. Ministry had bothered to actually survey the damage they might have noticed. The complete lack of bird nor monkey calls, the lack of primate song, wouldn't come as much of a surprise, as arboreal species were particularly vulnerable to wildfire, but the birds should always return. But if anyone was to walk around in the charred rainforest, nothing but the hum of insects and amphibians would greet their ears. A winter passed and still nobody visited the area. Grass grew and saplings and shot up from under, and beside the corpses of the elated giants bring a hint of new life to the place. The bug were absolutely everywhere, and they were huge scorpions the size of a laptop lie in ambush for baguette caterpillars, spiders the size of cats spin webs to catch baseball flies. Thank God. Nobody visited the site of the giant arachnids, would eventually goon to give the unfortunate discoverer of their species a seizure. For now, the arthropods annexed the area. The insects once again reigned supreme. The real monsters, however, were lurking in the river nightmares of teeth and scale that hunt for the honey from the water's edge to the deepest holes of the riv. Snakes, crocodiles, and turtles grew to Jurassic proportions. The fish minded more than a few later of the age of dinosaurs. The bull sharks that naturally inhabit the freshwater grooves swapped to 30 feet long and began to develop a love for the freshwater spilopods and crustaceans that filled the water. This anomalous Eden shockingly lacked anything with a spine that walked on land. Every mammal was missing, every bird was gone, every reptile was absent before the summer wildfires. Everything from jaguars to tapirs populated the lush and green undergrowth, but now it was all gone, lost to the spreading darkness that still creeps out of that forgotten forest from the animal's point of view. The end came very quickly. There was a brilliant light in the heavens, and a great pillar of smoke and fire rose up from the earth. Upon impact, some of the nimbler creatures close to the impact ran, while the more sapient of the kingdom raced to the treetops to get a view. The birds saw happened. Thought the mammals did not. The birds, blessed with vision across a wider spectrum than mammals, watched in blissful ignorance as the glowing white ball of metal began to rotate, and its CR supercharged gases erupted in a dazzling display akin to Aurora Australis. All originating with the glowing sphere, it made absolutely no noise whatsoever as it spinned impossibly fast. Even though it was in close contact with the earth, that gas crept through the forest like a spectre, haunting its way miles across the woodland floor, greedily devouring up souls for its master. This has had an interesting effect when it came into contact with biological matter, doing one of two things. When coming into contact with any eukaryotic cells lacking cell walls, cell death will immediately commence, and the animal's blood will instantly coagulate. In its veins, eukaryotic cells containing cell walls will spontaneously combust at temperatures approaching 5,000 Kelvin. The immediate effect of this was of a blazing wildfire, in-airing expanding from the object at the center. Only arthropods and aquatic animals were spared on land due to their breathing habits. An approximate 15-kilometer radius was sterilized within 2 hours, and the glowing cloud had stayed over that vision of hell for 3 days. Despite the dispersal of the cloud, the wildfire raged for weeks. Some of the oldest sect ions off the proud forest were simply erased from memory, replaced only with an endless field of smoldering charcoal. One interesting upside was a massive surplus of oxygen in the local atmosphere. Whatever that sphere was, it was spitting out oxygen at an absurd rate. It was calm and cool, now only glowing a soft baby blue as an endless hissed and swirled off a fight. To vent hot, the object had the highest oxygen concentration around. To vent, the enormous insects completely avoided it. Nothing grew within 400 m of the object, and neither the reptiles nor the arthropods ever went anywhere near it. Whether it was merely primal fear or something darker may never be known. What is known is that any animal that came close to the sphere would panic and frantically try to escape to safety far from this unwelcome visitor from the stars. Of course, eventually the anomaly strapped within would get out. The sharks were the first things to escape, as they're naturally migratory, and the insects couldn't exist outside of the enhanced oxygen atmosphere. A 7-year-old child went missing while washing her clothes in the great river. Her mother had been hanging clothes on the dock behind her when she heard a splash, and then some other claimed to see an enormous fins lip out into the deep, gliding through a crimson cloud that turned her blood cold. A week later, a fisherman's capsized hollowed tree canoe washed up downstream of the village. The peasants were terrified the river was their artery, and without it they would exsanguinate. Charms, idols, and rituals adorned the river banks, the petrified popers doing everything in their power to drive this demon from their shore wars. But it was to no avail. The attack started to escalate around the region. Bathers and people washing their hands vanished without a trace. The Brazilian government was, of course, alerted to the alarming frequency of the agent shark attacks. The government did not entirely discredit these disappearances, but could not believe that giant sharks were to blame. Then a fisherman reeled in a 25-2000 bull shark, and international me came to play. Damned shark fought for 5 hours. The steamboat had come up the coast from Sao Paulo, bringing with its steel cables and giant shark hooks. It put up a glorious fight, trailing the spool all the way down to the lead wire and staying under the boat so long that the captain thought the fish had drowned. But the scream of the wire as the fish ran to shed, that idea, in fact, it was likely that the fight would have lasted hours more if not for the other shark. What truly captured the imagination of the world was the blood-curdling YouTube image of a monster 1.5 times the size of the hooked beast coming up from below and taking the cord fin of its unlucky trapped kin. There was no hiding this anymore. The cat had not only escaped the bag but had broken free and had begun to consume the local peasantry. The subsequent inquiry was almost immediately classified, and requests for consultations were dispatched to world leaders. Scientists from the North European Asia flocked to the mouth of the Amazon to make the trek into the heart of darkness. The first search party had merely fed the monsters with only 3 shells. Shocked scientists returning home to tell their tale from hell. The Navy provided a suitable escort for the second expedition, dispatching a destroyer and several craft to see the scientists through their purgatory. The discoveries were rapid and shocking. The local animals had gone through a rapid process of speciation, the likes of which man had never seen. 30 different species of caiman inhabited these rivers, seemingly due to the animals' greatly diminished lifespan and greatly increased reproductivity. Animals lived their whole lives and died within 3 years. Some of the bugs went through their entire life cycles in a matter of hours. Next to be discovered was the greatly increased metabolism. These animals rapidly burned through calories at an unimaginable rate. The bigger animals required up to 50,000 calories a day, which was completely unsustainable in the local environment. Despite this elevated metabolism, it didn't actually seem like any of the animals needed any food at all to stay alive. One specimen of serpent refused to eat anything at all for 3 whole months, despite being offered an abundance of food every day. Regardless, the animals lived on. It didn't take long to locate the epicenter of the event. Drone footage highlighted the charcoal ring, where the sphere lay still hissing blue steam. Had since the event they performed every test that their minds could think of. They measured its radioactivity, electromagnetic signature, spectroanalysis data was surprising light. Despite the most advanced scientific measuring tools known to man, all they could figure out is that they had no idea what fictional was, and that it was spitting out oxygen and idiom. The idiom came as an immediate shock. I thought they already knew it was radioactive. They made camp a considerable distance away from the object, and on that first night dinner was absolutely silent. Nobody wanted to break the silence and suggest the UNS suggestible. Nobody wanted to verbally give life to the horror. Before their very eyes the next day, the color abruptly changed to a blimps, and the scientists set up their measuring tools once again and filmed the entire show. They nervously laughed and cracked dark jokes and speculation over the contents of the sphere. Silence descended like nightfall when the blinking increased in tempo. The steaming had picked up its pace now, and the scientists looked openly afraid. Some of them suggested retreating to the destroyer, while the superior said commands to stand their ground. Whatever happened to that object, they would stay and double. It nested as the blinking continued to grow in speed. A sound too low to be fully heard matched its lights. The sound produced a vibrating effect in the chest cavity, which caused people within range to begin violently coughing. The scientists who did not break and run out did not make it back alive. Those that remained struggled for each breath. The commanders waving pistols at the cameramen, willing them to maintain the record unto death. As their rhythmic flashing and sounding reached fever pitch, organs began to hemorrhage and vital systems began to shut down. The Captain watched the display before him through the deck spyglasses on the bridge. Themen curled over in agony, fury vomiting something red into the jungle clay. Officers clinging to camera mounts in death, blood streaming out of every extremity. It didn't take long for all the scientists to quickly expire. When the last officer had finally given his last, a great sound like an enormous horn blared through the canopy glass, and fragile plastic instruments aboard the destroyers hattered sailors ducking for cover against the unnumbered hail of glass, suffering. He object was completely surrounded by the mist now, and the lights flashed quickly from color to color. As fast as lightning, the great sound had reduced to a dull humanatural and deeply unsettling. The sound seemed to invade every man's ears, violating their consciousness through their ears and burrowing itself. Unwelcoming into the deepest, darkest corners of their minds, grown men cried out for their mothers in agony. A great many aboard the ship were freely bleeding into the opaque waters, and as the captain squinted in the midday sun as war, he could see enorm dark shapes circling just below the muddy water's surface. The order was given to pull back, and as if rejoicing in mercy, the ship's engines pat into life. The bow began to turn to starboard, then all the way around as the destroyer gave full steam away from the glowing, howling object. As the destroyer came around a bend in the river, it seemed that the skies seemed to open up and the clouds swept down to kiss the earth. The mist and the clouds swirled and clashed violently in an electrical storm, the booming torrent being heard many miles through the jungle. Lightning bolt after lightning bolt shot down from above and crashed down into the object. Then, with the last great pillar of blue flame, the object exploded and bits of the earth flew high into the skies. Finally, the deafening sound of silence once again suffocated the jungle. The destroyer held water, unsure of what to do now. They radioed in their position, and a brief summary of the events to their base camp command was apoplectic. The whole idea of sending the Navy was so that none of the world's leading scientists wound up dead, and now where with a destroyer. Captain, who lost nearly the entire scientific staff and retreated from an electrical storm, command ordered an immediate expedition on to ascertain exactly what had happened to the sphere and the scientists. When the captain warned that he may face a potential mutiny if he gave the command to turn around, the commanding officers screamed threats of court-martials and secret police visits if the object was not immediately scouted. That is how the little chase craft wound up loaded with Marines. Only one of the surviving members of the scientific team volunteered to escort the crew, thought that had to be forced under threat of immediate torture. One removable was all it took to get the Jing professor into the Zodiac. Thought the commanding officer had brought with him the pair of pliers just in case their teeny craft had landed on the shore about 50 feet away from the sphere. Gone was the glowing energy and aurora australis of before. Gone was the sickening humming and the electrical storm. Now all that remained of the object was its empty shell with a massive hole pushing the walls out from the inside. The scientist consulted. His counter-radiation levels had tripled in the past hour. They proceeded with caution up to the remains, slowly taking each terrified step on rubber legs that screamed begged to take them anywhere on Earth. But at that object, their horror was insurmountable. Several men refused to come any closer. Only the professor, still bleeding from his gums, could be to come right up to the object. The panics in his eyes only intensified as she creeped closer to the broken sphere. Aisha's hand touched at this, eyes shot open, and fell to his knees. Her ripped off his helmet, despite the radiation he vomited hard onto the ground in front of him. Tears streamed from his face as she scrambled on his hands and knees like an animal back to the group. He tried to get the words out, but the radioactive material was already overwhelming him. He grasped at this throat while his body descended into seizure and his soul vacated his body. The commander gripped his rifle tightly and bravely took one step after another until he reached the edge of the object. He looked all over until he finally met the site that took the professor's life, a single trail of human footprints leading from the sphere. All the way to the tree line, the commander collapsed onto his sand, unclipped his radio command. Coming over. We have a confirmed sighting of a xeno entity. Be advised that they are highly radioactive and it looks exactly like a human.